I've been at Point Loma now for almost 8 years. And in those 8 years, I've had debates, arguments, discussions with many different colleagues. But I've had more with Rick than anybody else. And they have been to my great benefit. Rick comes from a tradition different from the Nazarene Wesleyan holiness, and therefore has been, I think, very effective and perhaps even prophetic in terms of identifying some of the things that we take for granted here as a university and need to be perhaps called upon, or at least to reflect more deeply about. And in that respect, Rick, for many years, how long have you been here now? 20 years has been a significant and important voice about who we are as a university and as a faculty. Beyond the fact that he's been a dedicated and hardworking professor and really one of the top scholars that we are blessed to have here at Point Loma. So his latest project has been on cotton mather, and it is with great honor that we'll be able to hear a little bit more about this, one of, as he has called it, the first American evangelical, an early Puritan minister and theologian and biblical scholar who has, in many ways, helped to shape even who we are as Wesleyans and Nazarene. I say we, and within the context of the broader evangelical tradition. So let's give Rick a hearty welcome.
Clear things up. I was born into a Methodist family. I went to a Methodist throughout the early 70s. We were in a Methodist church in Salinas, and I did all that Jesus Camp stuff with, was it Ron Salisbury was one of those guitar players, and you know, I did all those Methodist Wesleyan camps. My dad was a dyed-in-the-wool Wesleyan. I took him to London once, and he wanted to do this stupid Wesley tour all over the place, and it's like, But no, I feel very comfortable among Wesleyanism. The trouble with why I'm in a Presbyterian church is because a bishop moved a pastor in who just blew the church up. You know, we had a nice evangelical Wesleyan church going, Methodist church, and then some bishop moved a guy in who just destroyed it. And he basically kicked us out. So my dad did what every good evangelical does, which is go look for the best youth group in town. And we went over to the best youth group, and it happened to be Presbyterian. So there you go. You know. So I'm going to pass around these. These are just show and tell. There's 10 volumes of these that are eventually come out. There's a 4th volume out, but I left it at home. This is the work we're doing with cotton mather. That's sort of the biggest scholarly thing out there right now, and my volume is going to be volume 8. It's supposed to be done into this year. I'll pass out these two. These you can buy for $10, man. Deep discount here, so you can pass those around. And I'm going to talk mainly about the argument in that book there, the First American Evangelical. Start off, and feel free to jump in at any moment, and we can be very informal about this. But the thing is that evangelicalism, you know, what is it? There's always been sort of debates and stuff about it, and so I don't even go there. If you just, you know, some people don't think evangelicalism exists. Other people say it started here. Other people started there. The great tradition of evangelicalism is that it's a sort of network of churches, of colleges, the CCCU, very much an evangelical network, Young Life, Parachurch, Bill Bright doing Campus Crusade for Christ, all these things that, especially this post-World War II sort of neo-evangelicalism, but then also evangelicalism as it reaches back deep into the American culture. So that's what I'm more engaged with. And sociologists have come up with sort of a 5-point checklist on evangelicalism. Other people fight this because it doesn't mention the Holy Spirit, you know, and how can, you know, revivalism is so important for Wesleyan revival, you know, evangelicalism. Wesley, when In this book here, this is Mark Noll's book, The Rise of Evangelicalism, The Age of Edwards, Whitfield, and West. And the first chapter's on Cotton Mather. And then this one here is Doug Sweeney. He's really becoming one of the big historians of the early American evangelical story. But especially, he just wants to call it a story. And I agree with Doug. As a historian, evangelical there isn't an ism to it. It's not a set of beliefs, but it is a story. It's a tradition. It's identifiable. There's certainly foggy edges to it. Some of you don't want to be called evangelicals, I know. Frankly, in the CCCU terms, you are evangelicals because you work at an evangelical institution. Wesley, so you can decide for yourself, but in the grand world of like journalism, you're all evangelicals, you know, if you even believe anything, you know. So the thing of it's a vague term. This came out. A friend of mine, John Turner, who's also he's a George Mason. He's really big. Did the biography of Bill Bright and other things like that, Campus Crusade.
Right.
Did this right after my book comes out. I'm thinking, shoot down the whole evangelicalism after, you know, how can it end? But
Rick, would you say that all Puritans were evangelical?
absolutely not. That's the whole point of my book. Is Puritanism ends, evangelicalism starts. And that's traditional. That's like a lot of people say that. And I'll show you that in a second. The thing here is that with the connotations of evangelicalism that get thrown around politically and socially and stuff like that, a lot of people just don't want it and would like to see the term go away. But it's sort of here to stay. It's you know. So I'm going to give you this book, which is, I was asked to write this book on Cotton Mather, and I said no at first because, you know, I mean, the last biography of Cotton Mather got the Pulitzer Prize. How do you follow that guy, you know? And so I said no, and then they said, oh, it doesn't have to be that good. And I said, oh, all right, I can do a book that's not that good. I mean, shoot. And so I jumped into it, and it was really fun to do. This is where I started. There's a really interesting family story to the beginning of the highest level of thought in American scholarly life, and it's with this pastoral family called the Mathers. And there's Richard Mather, who's the father, and he came with the Puritans over. Then there's Increase Mather, his son, who's this incredible figure, and in many ways much smarter and much more deep thinking and much more powerful than his son. And his son is Cotton Mather. This book came out about 10 years ago now, and you see it's the last Puritan art. You see that this idea that Puritanism was fundamentally sort of inward thinking. It wanted to perfect a sort of city on a hill, political, religious culture in a specific spot. And so he was the last Puritan. And then that raises the question as to who Cotton is. And that, a lot of people dealt with that over a number of decades. This is a book that came out in the 70s by a guy at Richard Lovelace, an excellent evangelical historian at Gordon Conwell Seminary. And we see the origins of American evangelicalism in Cotton Mather. And so, you know, that was in the 70s, that was going around. And then this is a better picture of the two. Increase Mather, Cotton Mather. So something's going on between this father and son, which has ripples throughout history. And this is one thing where we historians do. You can disagree with it if you're a sociologist or you know, different kinds of ways we come at history. But historians generally see people at the center of events. We see people as having effect. We don't just see germs and isms and forces yeah, I'm looking at you back there, Roscoe. And so, you know, a person is actually at the center of what is now this movement, which is very important in America. And if you define evangelicalism as including the Pentecostals, which a lot of people do, then it's now the largest movement in the world, is Pentecostal evangelicalism. Okay? And so where does it have its American roots? It's in Cotton Mather, who John Wesley read and liked the writings of Cotton Mather. Cotton Mather is about 40 years older than John Wesley. Okay? And so if there's a person who's at the center of sort of the beginnings of evangelicalism, then there's also a place. And we historians like how geography fits with history. And the geography of Cotton's life and the circumstances surrounding his life made him, he doesn't create evangelicalism, he becomes the focal point of a type of populist movement that we look back on and see him at the center of it. Okay, in his mind, he is not creating a new movement. He's actually just sort of embodying a spirit that is very dynamic at a place, at a time. And it's in Boston, and it's at the end of the 17th century and the beginning of the 18th century. So I'm going to run through what are the major aspects of Cotton Mather's sort of beginnings of evangelicalism. It's a fun story. It runs fast. The witch trials are at the center of it here. But always keep in mind what we're talking about is really a triangle. There's the north end of Boston here, which is still a wonderful place to have food, and great place. The back of my book, I put a walking tour of the north end of Boston. If I was a scholar, would Sam Powell put a walking tour in the back of one of his books? Absolutely not. I mean, he's a scholar. I put a walking tour in the back of my book. All right, so you can walk here. This is Matherland. And then this is actually the close-knit neighborhood that he worked out of. His wife comes from Charlestown. The minister who was his mentor in most everything is the minister in Charlestown. And then, of course, everyone is completely tied to Cambridge here. And so you have this very deep connection here, which is the beginnings of evangelicalism. And then in the book, I actually talk about how both Increase and Cotton Mather like to take a fall vacation every year in which they would do a revival tour. They would go to churches and crowds would come and do all sorts of stuff. And that would be where they would run from Salem up to Ipswich, which runs right through Gordon College and all that. And so Gordon Conwell Seminary sits right in Hamilton there, where Cotton Mather actually, out of his stupid generosity, bought land and gave it to a church. He did this all the time. He dies broke. His wife, his third wife, gets very mad at him. She makes him sign a prenuptial agreement that she can't have access to his money because he just gives it away. He gets rich at times, but he just gives it all away. He's a very, very generous man. At one point, he writes in his diary that he gives 600 books a year away to just, if you're a pastor from the frontier, he meets you, he just gives you a bunch of books. Here, you'll need these, stuff like that. He's incredibly generous. Okay, so we'll jump into some of this stuff. Now, the first great event in Cotton's young life is this revolution that happens in 1689. It's a one-day revolution. It's incredible. It was highly organized by the Puritan elite because England had gone into a new imperial structure. There were these Catholic-leaning kings. We're going to get in 1689. This is right at the center. 1688, 1689 is when we move from the Glorious Revolution in which James II is ousted from England, and then William and Mary come in. Okay, and we're across the ocean, so we're not connected up in time exactly with that. But the thing is that in Boston, the elite members of society actually kidnapped the governor and a ship captain, a royal captain of Her Majesty's warship, in the harbor. This is super treason, Every one of these is putting their head on the line, and they immediately have ready a document to throw out, to paste up all over town, to calm everyone down, saying what exactly they've done. Cotton Mather wrote that document. Okay, and in it, it's called the Declaration of Sentiments. Here, I'll go to this. This is in our bicentennial. This is David Levin was the Stanford professor. And he writes articles like this, Cotton Mather's Declaration of Gentlemen and Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, and shows that pretty much everything in the Declaration of Independence is in Cotton Mather's declaration. You know, it's not like he's inventing it. It's British political talk, you know. But this revolution, this one-day, carefully orchestrated, perfect revolution that no one gets killed at and there's no blood spilled, you know, John Adams knows all about this. You know, Sam Adams knows all about this. These are the people who are carrying this into the American Revolution. And then, of course, David Levin wrote this all up in his big book in the 70s with Harvard University Press about Cotton Mather, the young Cotton Mather, you know, and how he had affected America. So there's always a political element to evangelicalism. There always has been. Cotton believes very deeply that the Bible teaches republican structures and not monarchy. He goes and he gets this from the Dutch writers and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of people writing about this right now because there's a tendency for textbooks to say that Republicans are sort of supported by the Enlightenment. No, if you actually read Alexander Hamilton, the guy's quoting the Bible most of the time. The guy who writes Common Sense, you remember the, what's his name? Thomas Paine's quoting the scriptures for republicanism out of the Bible, you know? And so where does he get it? Well, it's in Samuel saying to the people of Israel, they want the king, right? And he's saying, hey, look what a king's going to do to you, you know? It's going to certain power and all that sort of stuff. And then you go back to Moses being told to create a council of 70 elders. And these elders that constantly appear throughout the Bible are a type of Senate, you know, and so there's these elders, and then there's various things, and one of the most powerful for Cotton Mather is Joseph, because he wants to like Joseph. Joseph is presented as a type of hero at the end of Genesis for being a slave who's been, you know, comes up to be help the king, but dang it, when you read further into the story, Joseph, once he starts working for Pharaoh, he is the one who puts the people into bondage and takes away their land in order to support the rise of a tyrannical monarchy. And so Cotton Mather has in the Biblioamericana and stuff, these discussions about how, dang it, you know, Joseph is one of our Christian heroes, but at another level, politically, he's an example of what is wrong. And so you have this deep, deep biblical republicanism that appears especially in 1689 at this Boston Revolution. And so Levin and these other guys have always pointed out that, you know, Americans just don't want to, you know, modern textbooks don't want to see republicanism coming out of the Bible, and so it just doesn't fit their model of the Enlightenment and stuff. And so they tend to downplay Cotton Mather's, you know, revolution in 1689. But a lot of people are saying we gotta upgrade this because that was the, you know, this is the model of a great bloodless revolution on Christian principles, was the creation of an anti-monarchy Republican government in Boston. Now, the long term, what happens to this is Cotton is, nobody dies and stuff because luckily that glorious revolution in England sort of schmoozed everything out and no one was going to chase anybody down or anything like that, even though the governor was very upset. But out of it, Cotton Mather wrote this book. It's an anonymous book. He rarely wrote anything anonymously, but he writes over 500 books. But but this is a 1698 publication, and this is written in his part here. The main part is in 1696. It's about Reformation and Revolution. That the Reformation Revolution system that the Protestantism is based upon freedom. This eleutheria is the Greek word for freedom. And so there is no illegal, despotic, and arbitrary government may be imposed upon the brave English nation's liberty and property or our cognizance to avoid civil abuses. They call them eleutherians. He makes a big deal, and throughout his life, he will associate evangelicals, and he uses that term, the evangelical party, with the eleutherians. They are the freedom lovers. And who are the people who aren't the freedom lovers? there are these people like, you know, Lot, who looks back on his wife. He calls them Idumeans. Is that how you pronounce it? Idumeans? Idumeans. These are the people from Edom, remember, who are, but don't get to the promised land. They turn back before the promised land. They're like halfway Christians. They go, but then they don't go all the way. You know? They don't really embrace the freedom and promised land that God wants to give them. Okay? So, what I start with here is that there's, although many people would like to divorce evangelicalism from all of the politics that gets wrapped up in it, really can't. We're deeply enmeshed in this political rhetoric of America. The whole notion of evangelical, biblical, Republican thinking. Okay, and by Republican, I mean structurally. I don't mean, you know, Ronald Reagan. Okay, any questions? Okay, good. Go to the next one. It gets more fun. It gets way more fun. Yeah, it doesn't get more fun than this, okay? The witchcraft trials are just, you know, we love them. And we love them for lots of reasons. One is that we get to impose upon this crazy moment in history all sorts of things we want to think about, whether it be drugs or women's rights or town fights or, you know, all sorts of stuff. And superstition versus rationalism. You know, there's a million things you can do with it. Trouble is, there's very few documents. He was the judge. He's the judge in charge of the witch trials. That's William Stoughton. And Stoughton did not keep any notes or anything of the trials. And so he asked Cotton Mather, a young 26-year-old minister, to write up a justification for what the judges did. Now, Cotton himself thought that the judges had done wrong. They had used evidence wrong. He stood right in the center with his father and with all these other people saying that this shouldn't have happened the way it did. But he was lieutenant governor, and Cotton Mather is always very submissive to authority, never a rowdy. So an authority, one of the great authorities of which he highly respected, says, I need you to make a justification for the witch trials. So Cotton does write, after the fact of the witch trials, if you read it, he's constantly saying, hey, I wasn't there, I don't know, but you know, and he's constantly backing off in his rhetoric from the witch trials, but he is presenting the evidence and the executions of these witches. So, because of that, in the 19th century, a good 150 years after the witch trials, Cotton Mather's name becomes so wrapped up in it. So, like this woman here, she wraps the whole story of the witch trials around Cotton Mather. He wasn't even there at the witch trials. His position with the witch trials, when the first news of the witch trials came out, Cotton Mather, his thing was, let's take all of the girls and split them up and send them out to separate families, good families, and let's make sure they have a good diet, that they're sleeping well, that they drink cold water. He was into cold water, and then and they exercise. And he recommended horseback riding. This is gonna, and then let's see what happens with this. Let's take it slow. What's going on? But that was never taken. There was a real rush to judgment by the judges. And then I made it up about I sometimes exaggerate. Not the horseback riding. He did. I just threw that in there. Yes.
Is his father one of the judges?
Yeah, Hawthorne's great-grandfather. I think it was called Haythorne at that time.
Yeah, but I'm saying is Increase Mather one of the
no. The ministers are never judges. This is Puritan New England. And so ministers are not involved in the trials because they believe in separation of church and state. So no minister can be a magistrate. And so there's no minister on one of Richards is on, is in Cotton Mather and Increase Mather's church. Stoughton is a very close friend. Samuel Sewell is the tutor of Cotton Mather. So he's very closely twined with these people. But those people are all magistrates. Yes?
Sorry, you just said something that confused me a little bit. I was under the impression that the Puritans, church and state are closely intertwined. And that separation doesn't happen until Roger Williams breaks off and forms Rhode Island.
No. Church and state are entwined that voters are church members. So church and state are entwined at the very bottom.
Okay.
So church membership makes you for voting. Okay. But no minister can be a magistrate.
Gotcha.
No magistrate can be a minister.
Simultaneously.
I don't know of anyone who moves from one to the other.
Really?
They wanted him to become, Richard Mather, the father of Increase Mather, wanted him to be an assistant minister because you graduate from college, everyone's open for either job. But once he goes as lieutenant governor and stuff like that, he's never a minister. Yeah. Very important position, yeah.
Well, why would he have Cotton do the,
Cotton was, everyone went to Cotton for, he writes well. He's beautiful. And his great popularity is going to be coming out of these books and things he writes. He's fun to read. He's a hard thing to read because it's 17th century, but it's like a roller coaster. It's just darn fun. And it just rolls around. He loves to do wordplay. He loves to do all sorts of stuff. He's really fun to read. His father is bored. His father is his senior pastor. He is, for Cotton Mather through his whole life, up until the last 5 years, is an associate pastor to his father. And his church likes him way better than they like Dad. Okay? So as an associate pastor, Cotton's in charge of doing all these small groups and running the youth group, and he leads the choir and has all these ideas about how to do choir, writes books on music. He writes books on everything. And so he's this real active guy, out in the streets guy, and his dad likes to sit in his room and write books. Dad writes better books, but Cotton is a much more dynamic figure than his dad. Yeah. Okay, let me go on with this witch trials thing. So Cotton is involved, but he's involved only at that level. He's a spokesperson for Stoughton, the head judge. He has done this before too. He will. Some of his most interesting political writing is where he's a speechwriter for a governor named Bellamont. Okay, and at that point he's very tied in, and that's a point where he's maybe most optimistic about being powerful like his dad. But then Bellamont is pulled back out of the government. Dudley comes in as the governor, and Dudley hates Cotton, and so Cotton Mather never again gets to be the guy who writes speeches for the governor or gets called upon by important people to do. So at that point, in around 1702, he starts to do his much more other things. Okay, but he's not in the witch trials. He does believe, of course, in witches. Very biblical. He has several demon-possessed girls that he has to deal with in his youth group. Haven't we all? But the thing is that angels heal. Cotton Mather's involved with a lot of healings, but it's never him who does the healing. It's angels come and different stuff like that do the healing. Angels talk to Cotton Mather. His father wrote a big book on angels called Angelography, and then Cotton, though, is the one who lived. Angels actually talk to Cotton. They don't like his dad. But so, it's a really interesting dynamic that's going on. And so certainly Cotton Mather believes in witches, but he thinks that the witchcraft trials of Salem are a complete debacle. Never should have happened, never should have gone. Okay? And, but you're just going to never get away from it. You see, this is this new Salem TV show, and that's Cotton Mather right there, he condemns Salem witches while fighting his own demons. And our friend Kelly back there and I wrote a little thing about this show, a review called Cotton Mather and the Uppity Women, which is in Books and Culture. Then, of course, you've got, how do you fight? How do you fight comic books? Here's Cotton Mather comic books. This is Cotton Mather, and he's trying to control this woman's brain to fight Spider-Man. Look at this. And then, of course, here's Cotton Mather with his cross, the tall creature, and he's called, his name in the book is Witch Slayer. And there's a whole series of Cotton Mather versus Spider-Man things. And like with this one, a lot of it's about sex. He's afraid of women, and so therefore he's crazy, so that comes along. In the 1970s, there was a real beginning to try and look at Cotton Mather more seriously, because there were several biographies and of course the Crucible and all that sort of stuff that really had promoted the witch trials. And once you start looking at the documents, you have to go, oh gosh, you know, Cotton's much more interesting than just the witch trials. So this book came out, Robert Middlecoff, one of the great Berkeley historians, 3 generations of Puritan intellectuals, really sort of laying out the deep thinking that's going on there. This got the Pulitzer Prize and the Bancroft Prize, which is Kenneth Silverman's biography, came out in the 80s. Earlier in the 70s, the two science historians wrote Cotton Mather the first significant figure in American medicine, because he does a lot of medical writings, and of course there's the inoculation crisis at the end of his life. And this book just came out a few months ago, and the whole first part of it's all about Cotton Mather, because he wrote a lot about hysteria and madness, you know, and how to handle these sort of things, all from a pastor's perspective. As a pastor, he saw himself as a health consultant. And so he walked his neighborhood in North End, and he helped with your spiritual lives and also your physical lives. He always brought with his pockets full of trinkets and toys for the kids, but also he always brought these little sermon books about family life and devotions, and so he passed these out so the kids can read to each other and stuff. He's always interested in the family, living together, and being a healthy unit, you know. And so he did it all. He said holistic medicine is sort of the full picture of holistic medicine. And so he was very interested in these sort of situations like, especially epilepsy. He saw epilepsy, and this often gets tied in with the witch trials, you know, as these girls start acting crazy, epileptic, you know, with all of the contortions. And his attitude is that the epilepsy, like with almost all of his health stuff, it's physical. It comes from your physical. You know, these sicknesses, epilepsy, this is all physical. But angels, whether good angels or bad angels, can get at you when you're in an epileptic fit. And so you, as an epileptic person, have to be very careful about, you know, what's happened to you. You may have visions, but where are those visions from? You know, type of thing. So he's very consistent about this, and he believes very much in, you know, spirit is going to use these situations like your own personal physical health as a way to disrupt things and cause confusion and things like that. And that's what he thinks happens at the witch trials with those girls, is the devil started using those girls. Okay, and the girls allowed themselves to be used. This is the newest book, came out this month. I haven't got my copy yet, but the reviews of it from folks, this is, he's the professor of early American studies at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and he runs this massive Germanic machine that's studying Cotton Mather. And, you know, prophecy, piety, problem, historicity. Cotton Mather is considered one of the great historians of early America. And so his methods, how he thought about history, how he deals with history, especially tied in with the Bible and things like that, are very important for us to sort of, in our field, is just sort of understanding the development of being a historian in America. Yeah, so he's 70s and 80s and ongoing. There's lots of books on Cotton Mather. This one just came out. This is 2016 in where is this? This is, I think it's the Wall Street Journal. But look at this. This is about the inoculation thing, 1721. Cotton Mather, that demon-haunted scourge of the Salem witches. It's the Wall Street Journal. How do you fight a comic book? You know, I don't know. You know, it's like, you know, my book is hopefully going to be read by this author, and then he'll just toss it and he'll read his comics book and believe his comics book. But it's all about Mather. You see, the whole book here is really about Mather, you know, because of his development. He's the one who promotes inoculations, and this is a very important thing for society. So Cotton Mather's been, you know, sort of revived after the witch trials as people saying, look, we got to understand this better. I mean, witch trials, you know, he's not even there, but he is a significant figure, and also you have these books about him being a significant figure. But I'd like to continue my story about the birth of evangelicalism, because what happens is after the witch trials, you do get what Cotton will talk about as the development of parties. Different people sort of rallying, and there's a church that gets built in Boston, and this is the Brattle Street Church. And Thomas Brattle was a guy who'd gone to school with. You know, they're very close. Close in age and stuff, but they don't like each other. But the Brattles, this is the first steeple in America, first steeple church in America. And they're bringing over English designs and stuff into Boston. And it symbolizes, by its architecture, a type of New English thought. And Cotton's not against this at all. He loves the empire. He thinks William and Mary are great. When the Hanoverians come in, George I and all, he loves it. And the street there in the North End is even named Hanover Street. So, but on the other hand, he's worried that Christianity will become too moderate. It'll be the sort of Episcopalian Protestantism, what were called the dissenters. And it is Wesley who comes out of this saying, yes, you know, the church has become too wimpy in the empire. And so Wesley's going to be reacting against that. But Cotton Mather sees it happen. He's 40 years older. And so it's happening in Boston. And this is a church that represents this moderate, rational Protestantism. It's Trinitarian. There's nothing unorthodox about it. And in fact, he preaches in that church. He has friends in that church. He marries a woman out of that church eventually. But on the other hand, this church represents a type of what he calls the Protestant interest, which is an imperial Protestantism. It's sort of good for the empire. And then he sees himself as, he calls it the evangelical interest. He says all of the evangelical interests in Boston are looking to me as a leader. That sounds cocky, but apparently it's true. I mean, he was this minister in town that really, you know, people loved. And he was given these sort of revivals, and there's revivals going on in his youth group and all that sort of stuff. And so he sees himself in a type of tension. That's not a full-on battle. Like I said, these churches all get together. Every occasion all the ministers are together and all that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, there's us and them. And this becomes most apparent when, these are I can give you the neighborhoods here. This is his church here, and that's the Brattle Street Church there. It's a small town. It's only about 6,000 people at this point. So this is what the Mather Church would have looked like, the old Puritan style. And this is this new English Georgian architecture coming in. And, but the thing really revolves around Harvard now. Increase Mather is the president of Harvard, his father. And his father has done amazing things to hold Harvard together. Harvard has almost crashed 5, 6, 7 times over the last couple decades, and Increase Mather always comes in as the most powerful minister in Boston and the New England area to save Harvard. And he's very interested.
Did he give him a new brand?
What?
Did he give him a brand?
You know, actually he does.
Wow.
Increase Mather redoes the seal. He takes in Ecclesiam Christi or something in the Church of Christ, and then so he roots it, new seal. He writes a new charter for the university, and he changes it from college to university. University means that you have a charter from the king, and that's very dangerous, because a charter from the king means the king gets to stick his nose into your business. And this is a Congregationalist group, and they don't want the Bishop of London having anything to say. So there's great fear that if we move to university status, that the Bishop of London will have some words. And so Increase believes, because he has lived in England for 5 years, that he has a relationship with the king that this will work out. We can become a full-on university. And, of course, we're going to name doctorates, and so who gets to be the first doctorate of Harvard? Increase Mather. And names himself doctorate. Now, Cotton Mather's a doctor, too, but he gets his doctorate from the University of Glasgow as an honorary doctorate. Increase makes himself a doctor, and which is a good, solid tradition. And the thing is that He does. He's branding it, but he's branding it in a sort of more religious mode. But he wants to use the structures of the university to give it like authority and reputation. Okay? And this becomes a crisis because when Governor Dudley comes in, Dudley says the last thing we want to do is have the king or the Bishop of London looking into any business going on in Boston. So we need Increase Mather out. And so Increase Mather effectively gets fired. It's one of those things where we actually, he was so important that he actually lived in Boston and was at his church, but also ran Harvard. And he didn't, you know, Harvard's a little village, Boston's a great town. Dudley knew he wouldn't go, so Dudley says he gets the board to vote that the president has to live in Cambridge. Well, Increase box and fights, but eventually he moves over to Cambridge for about 6 months, and he says, I can't take it. He goes back. The presidency is left open. At this point, and this is a very important point, you're doing what my students do, which is
Let's
text.
take a picture of you.
Oh, okay. But the thing is, at this point, the legislature steps in. And the legislature, 100% of the legislature, which is elected very democratically out of all the towns of Massachusetts, 100% recommend Cotton Mather to be the next president of Harvard. Well, that's the last thing that Governor Dudley wants. So they go into this whole mishmash for several years, but twice over his career, there'll be this mass push to have Cotton Mather become president of Harvard, and he will be rejected by basically a cabal. And Thomas Brattle and the Dudleys, who's Thomas Brattle's cousin, they're these rationalist, moderate group. They're not bad people. Actually, they do a good job running Boston, but they see Cotton Mather as a wild card. And we do not want him running Harvard. Actually, what we want running Harvard is some lawyer who just will sort of lay low, stay calm, do nothing. And they found him. John Leverett, there's Leverett House there at Harvard, and Leverett did a great job of making Harvard completely innocuous. Whereas Cotton Mather very carefully laid out his plans. He wanted to follow the University of Halle, which was the greatest evangelical university in Europe, and he wanted Harvard to be a new University of Halle. He had all these great plans for it. And he eventually puts these plans into another book. He always writes a book. So you can read about it. But they wouldn't allow him to actually run the college. But the first science professor is out of Cotton Mather's youth group, and he's the one who recommends him to Harvard. He's on the board. The first Jewish person who converts to Christianity, but he becomes the Hebrew professor. Cotton Mather's the one who goes and recruits him. And along the way, Cotton Mather's dealing with this guy in England saying, hey, if you'll give this money to this little college in Connecticut, I'm sure they'll name it after you. And that was Elihu Yale. And so the people in Connecticut had never even known that this was being negotiated, but all of a sudden they had a pile of money and a new name. And that was Cotton. So he's got his fingers and everything, but they won't let him be the president of Harvard. And that further does the issue of evangelicalism versus these Protestant moderate rationalists. And the tensions continue throughout his time and will lead into what's called the Great Awakening. That's Harvard when he came. This building gets torn down. This was the Indian College there. And then this is Harvard when he, at the time of his death, he dies in 1728. This is 1724, okay? Or 1726 is when this is done. This building here is still there.
I've been in that.
Yeah, that one's Massachusetts Hall. Yeah, and they're nice buildings. Cotton Mather had become this great scholar. He was sort of the pride of the people, being this Christian evangelical scholar. This is his great history that got published in 1702. Most of his books are like this, these little sermon books and such. He also becomes this great leader of the Enlightenment in Boston. And so finish off with this role of the Enlightenment and then we'll be done. And wow, it's actually getting too far here. So basically, Cotton Mather leads this idea, okay, evangelicalism is political, it's very, very biblical, and at the same time, it's not moderate, it's actually enthusiastic. And at the same time, there's this enlightenment starting, and we want to actually engage the enlightenment. Enlightenment's great, so science and all this sort of stuff he loves. This is his book, big fat book called The Christian Philosopher, which is a science book, natural philosophy. Benjamin Franklin was in, we don't know if he was in Cotton Mather's youth group or what, but he knew Cotton Mather well as a very young man. Benjamin Franklin is John Wesley's age. And so he looked up to the Cotton Mather, and some of our nicest portraits of Cotton Mather come out of Ben Franklin's later letters and stuff. But, you know, he supported. Science was great. You have a critical engagement with the Bible. This is the Biblia Americana, that thing that you got there. And these are those, and we're working on those, getting them published. He also he wrote a big 200-page history of the Jews, which was about you know, the Jews during the Middle Ages and how they related to the Muslims and how they related to the Catholics. And in this, the Luther comes out looking bad. He opposes Jews. Some bishops are good, some bishops are bad. There's several of the church fathers that he very highly criticizes, appropriately so, for being anti-Jewish. And it's a real interesting 200 pages that he writes in the Biblia Americana. And so we look back on him as this grand intellectual leader who has this sort of fiery Christianity, very pietistic Christianity, and it's just tremendously rooted in the Bible. Everything comes out of the Bible. And he sees himself as the leader of a whole bunch of people who think that he's actually doing the right thing. But on the other hand, there are this sort of rationalist party who are very moderate about their Christianity and very open to the empire and see Cotton Mather and this evangelical movement as dangerous. And it's in that you move into the Great Awakening, which starts in the 1730s, a couple of years after he dies. And in the Great Awakening, that gets split up. You get the churches that become the evangelical wing and the others. Yes?
And in that split, my perception has been that the moderate wing seems much more in tune with Enlightenment thought than the evangelical wing.
With the mainline moderate thought of the Enlightenment in England, yes. But the evangelical thought, like Cotton Mather, is very tied in with the intellectuals in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And you get a lot of, really sort of the highest class Enlightenment thought is coming out of the Netherlands, not England. England's pretty boring.
Okay, so and can I ask one other thing, too? Because a lot of the portraits of Cotton Mather are kind of like he's a crank. He's sitting in his house doing all these weird, all this kind of weird stuff. And where does that kind of come from?
Oh, but you don't mean portraits, because this is the only picture we have.
I mean kind of the caricatures of him.
He wrote a big diary, and you shouldn't. His diary is full of his things that you and I would never, you know. He's a very up and down. He's melancholic. He says this. He stuttered. He had a deep stutter throughout his life. So when he was young, like Thomas Brattle and these other guys made fun of him because he stuttered. He couldn't do well in school because he stuttered. His father had to take him out of Harvard. And he says in his diary that, or you know, he actually says, I got really angry, you know. And so there was a time in my life where I was bitter. Okay. So there's a lot of moments in the diary that are where you have to go, hey, this is his private diary, you know, and let him speak, because he says his nastiest things about the other people. He'll call them manipulated by Satan and stuff like that. But he doesn't ever say that publicly or anything like that.
Okay, one other thing is that he did some early speculation that's in the Magnalia Christi Americana about whether or not the Native Americans are actual descendants of the Jews.
Yeah.
And doesn't he speculate that some of the apostles visited the Western Hemisphere?
Now here's an interesting thing about this. This is we gotta go?
No, I
Okay, real quick, just, Cotton Mather writes all of these big books of his as compilations. So often what looks to be his writing is actually quoting someone else. You have to read these things carefully. And Cotton Mather is actually fighting the ideas you just presented. There's a Dutch guy who has written that the Indians in America are the Jews. and that the apostle, all sorts of stuff. And he says absolutely not. He stands in the middle of another Dutch tradition, which is saying, no. The Jews, the 10 lost tribes and all that sort of stuff, or the lost tribes, or whatever they are actually people up in Syria, in Edessa area, Turkey, and that those are the real Jews that are lost. There's no Jews that came to America. And then he said, in the prophecies, the Jews are all going to be coming back to Jerusalem, not to America. And so he's actually fighting those ideas. But I grant you, it's sort of confusing. Sometimes you're just reading it and it goes, wow, it looks like he's saying this, but it's not.
Wow, that's in the Magnalia?
Yeah. Well, it's in the Magnalia. It's in a lot of his books. He wrote at the end of his life a thing called the Trace Magistris, which is it's about sort of an apocalyptic sort of picture of how everything's going to be wrapped up and stuff like that. Yes.
So we see three parties of the Puritans: Evangelical, Traditional, and the group that became Unitarian. And when did Harvard become Unitarian?
Yeah, Harvard becomes Unitarian about 1810, 1812, I think. 1809 is when Andover Newton breaks off. But here again, the term Puritan there is, you have to use very loosely by that, because these are New Englanders who are still hanging around. We can call them Puritan. But it's actually the Congregationalists and the Unitarians having a denominational issue between them over the control of Harvard.
And now Congregationalists are some evangelical and some...
Yeah, congregation, like every denomination, there's always an evangelical wing within them. But the Congregationalists are also mainline. Yeah?
So on one hand, he seemed like a man of great conviction who was able to, articulate his thoughts and position. And on the other hand, when you said that he made that decision to write the Justification for the sake of the truck. So I'm wondering, how did he battle with that? When to be submissive, when to not? Because that's kind of a big deal, and that's why so many people define him now.
One of the most interesting passages in the diary is where he's reading all this great stuff for the Enlightenment, and there's a lot of biblical criticism that he's reading where, it's all this sort of stuff where it's not truly history and all that sort of stuff. And he's reading and one of the ideas that's very intriguing to him is that there's a guy named Origen, an early church father, who said that everyone eventually goes to heaven, that hell is temporary, that there's this great apokatastasis in the end where it all gets gathered into heaven. And he likes that idea. And it's being promoted by a lot of people at that time. But he says in his diary, he says, I'm a pastor, and I can think and speculate, but I obey the tradition. I obey orthodoxy. And so I'm just not going to allow that to be in my thinking. Because we're always being tugged in various directions, but he always came back to this idea of, it's not up to me to decide these huge doctrines. I will follow the tradition. So in that sense, that's my best example for when he struggles with this obedience type of stuff. On the other hand, I just would like to leave you these incredibly Christian, pleasant man. It was really fun to write this biography of him because it's just sort of inspiring every day. I mean, the guy is very much a guy that I'm glad to see is sort of a founder of the evangelical movement that I'm part of, So I leave you with that because we need to get going here. So thank you very much for coming.